What is one to do when betrayal strips away your honor and that of your family? Do you stand your ground and accept the greatest challenge of your life? This is the story of Eliza and Éduard. Chapter 1. The Whispers of Mayfair. The London air in the year of our Lord 1818 was an intoxicating blur of perfume, ambition, and the low whisper of secrets. For 20-year-old Lady Eliza Beaumont, the opulence of the ton was the only world she had ever known. Her gown of blue satin, fashioned from the finest silk, was a striking statement of status, a sartorial masterpiece that ensured she stood out amongst the finest ladies of the season. Her father, Lord Beaumont, was not merely a nobleman of high standing, but a visionary businessman whose sharp judgment was as widely celebrated in the grand drawing rooms as the vintage of his exquisite Burgundy wine. The Beaumonts lived, to all appearances, at the very pinnacle of society, a position that drew no small amount of envy from their peers. Yet, beneath this flawless veneer, an imperceptible tension stirred. Eliza's father had embarked upon a high-stakes investment, an opportunity he swore would render the Beaumont family among the wealthiest in the realm. With the gleam of barely contained ambition in his eyes, he spent long hours confined to his study, poring over ledgers with a grim concentration he rarely afforded to social affairs. He was entirely persuaded it was a foolproof venture, never imagining that with a single stroke of a pen, he had placed his own honor and that of his family at desperate risk. At the very center of this venture stood the Marquess of Ashworth. Elegant, of impeccable bearing, and possessing a smile that revealed nothing, he was a predator with the calculating gaze of a banker. He moved through the crowded ballrooms as though he owned the very air, and none dared contradict him. To Eliza, the Marquess was a man of whom everyone spoke, yet whom nobody truly knew. Her father, however, placed absolute faith in him, and in the upper echelons of society, such trust was more valuable than an inheritance. When the Marquess finally approached Eliza, the music seemed to soften, fading into the background. He appraised her from head to toe, like a collector evaluating a rare work of art. Extending his hand with a touch of barely perceptible coldness, he led her to the center of the ballroom. As they swept into the cadence of the waltz, the Marquess leaned in, his voice a low, gravelly murmur devoid of any true romance. "Your beauty, Lady Eliza," he whispered, "is more captivating than any fortune. My name is untarnished, my future assured. I should be deeply honored if you would share my life." To Eliza, the Marquess was far from the man of her dreams. There was no love in his words. There was only an offer, crystal clear, that would secure her family's future. Holding her head high, her mind turned to her sister, Clarissa, who had recently been widowed, left with 2 young children and no means of support. Swallowing her romantic dreams, Eliza resolved to accept the attentions of the Marquess of Ashworth. The destiny of the Beaumont family seemed sealed. For now, they believed they were safe. Chapter 2. The Shattered Facade. The air in the Beaumonts' drawing-room was heavy and cold, despite the fire crackling in the marble hearth. 2 weeks after the ball, the Marquess of Ashworth made his appearance, though he bore none of the charming smiles he usually displayed before society. His face, carved in utter indifference, offered not a shred of warmth. In his hand, he carried a slim, unbranded leather portfolio, holding it with a deeply unsettling calm. Lord Beaumont offered him a glass of brandy. The Marquess refused with a polite, almost pitying gesture. "Thank you, Lord Beaumont, but I fear I have matters of the utmost urgency to address, and it pains me deeply that they concern you." Lord Beaumont paled. In the corner of the room, Eliza's mother stopped her embroidery needle mid-stitch. The tension was palpable. The Marquess sat, placing the portfolio silently upon the table. "My dear Lord Beaumont," the Marquess began, his voice a low, gravelly whisper, "I have been reviewing the documents of our investment in the tea trade. A most promising venture, and a most complex one. I am informed there is a severe delay in the shipments, and I must demand the immediate, full repayment of the debt you have incurred with my bank. Regrettably, it appears you have profoundly misunderstood the nature of our arrangement." Lord Beaumont bolted from his chair. "Misunderstood, Marquess? I relied upon your word of honor. You assured me the investment was secure, urged me not to miss the opportunity, and promised you would grant an extension in the event of a delay. I cannot meet the full debt at this present moment. You have my guarantee that the cargo will arrive." The Marquis regarded him with a false expression of sorrow. "And I do not doubt it, my friend. But I fear you failed to grasp the nuances. The capital you invested has been entirely compromised by these unexpected market turns. In simple terms, the money is gone. No ships will berth within the agreed time frame, and the debt is due immediately." Lord Beaumont sank back into his chair, his hands trembling violently. "But I gave everything. My fortune, everything is tied to this venture. How could this happen?" The Marquis leaned forward, a gesture of rehearsed concern. "As I told you, Lord Beaumont, it is a great pity. A harsh lesson, though not through any fault of your own, of course. The nature of commerce is, at times, merciless." The Marquis paused, his cold gaze shifting directly to Eliza. "And now, I must confront the gossip regarding our courtship. I cannot marry a woman whose father does not honor his debts. I feel I am being used merely as a means to finance your financial ruin. My dignity is at stake. My name is solid, and society expects me to marry a woman of equal standing." With that, the Marquis rose from his chair, leaving Lord Beaumont utterly broken, his head buried in his hands without another word. Outside, the carriage rattled away down the cobblestone street, the sound of the wheels echoing in Eliza's ears like a cruel mockery. Her family's honor was ruined. In her mind's eye, she could only see the faces of her sister and the little ones, whose future now hung by a single thread. Despair washed over her, and a bitter cold settled deep within her chest. If you are enjoying this tale of romance and betrayal, pray, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. By doing so, you ensure you will never miss a single chapter of Eliza and Éduard's destiny. Chapter 3: The Sanctuary of Thorns. The Marquess of Ashworth departed, leaving behind a stupor that felt heavier than any monetary ruin. In the days that followed, the Beaumont's social circle, once so warm and welcoming, turned ice cold. The whispers in the salons and the pitying glances pierced them like knives. Lord Beaumont, a man of unyielding honor, was forced to watch his name be dragged through the mud. It was this shame, far more than the bankruptcy, that broke them. Heartbroken, the family resolved to retreat to their country estate. The manor, which in Eliza's memory had always been a bright summer refuge, now resembled a mausoleum. The indoor air smelled of mothballs and sorrow. The furniture was draped in white sheets, and the windows were so clouded they barely let in the morning light. The days grew long and monotonous. Her father, consumed by shame and anger, seldom spoke. Her mother, a woman of great inner strength, had retreated into a painful silence. Clarissa returned to her old passion, painting, finding in her brushes a way to express her grief. Only the children provided a solitary source of joy in that bleak house. With a heart constricted by grief, Eliza sought refuge in the only place that promised a modicum of peace, the garden. Yet even this paradise of her childhood had not escaped the ruin. The roses her grandmother had so dearly loved were withered and dry. The vines had tangled into a labyrinth of thorns, and weeds choked the earth. It was a perfect mirror of her soul. In her desperation, she began to tear at the weeds. It was no mere pastime, it was a way to channel her pain. Within this new routine, she found a companion in silence, Anthony, the old gardener, who began to teach her the secrets of the earth. One afternoon, whilst working in the abandoned glasshouse, a floorboard gave way beneath her. Beneath it, in a dusty, forgotten corner, she discovered a small wooden chest. Inside lay her grandmother's journal. Its pages were filled with detailed botanical sketches, but one drawing caused her to stop completely. It was a rose, pitch black at its center, with petals that bled into a deep, rich purple. Written beneath it in an elegant script was its name, the Velvet Purple Rose. Her grandmother's notes were a beautiful blend of poetry and science. They detailed the complexity of the flower, its exact requirements for light, shade, and soil acidity. Eliza noticed numerous sketches detailing past failures, but at the very end, there was a drawing of the rose in all its magnificent splendor, accompanied by a single note. The small minds of society seldom tolerate what they cannot understand. Eliza shivered, struck by the profound truth of those wise words. Chapter 4. The Arrival of the Botanist. As the weeks passed, the melancholy atmosphere of the house began to yield to a faint glimmer of hope. Eliza, her hands stained with soil but her heart a little lighter, had begun to breathe life back into the garden. Watching her, Lord Beaumont felt a tremendous weight lift from his shoulders. There was a spark of vitality in his daughter that he had not witnessed in a very long time. One morning, as the family ate breakfast in silence, Lord Beaumont looked up from his newspaper. "Listen to this," he said, his voice echoing clearly across the room. "The Queen has summoned the most talented botanists in England to cultivate a flower of exceptional beauty to symbolize her new era. A color never before seen in the kingdom, a flower that flourishes in adversity. The reward is a title and a fortune." Eliza caught her breath. The description matched the velvet purple rose precisely. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was their salvation. She showed the journal to her father, and his face lit up with the very same passion she had seen in her grandmother's sketches. Lord Beaumont knew instantly that he must support his daughter in this challenge. Moreover, he glimpsed a chance to restore their fractured honor. Driven by this new hope, her father contacted a man named Éduard Wilson. It was whispered that he was a genius in his field, though he had somehow fallen into disgrace, though the details remained a mystery. The carriage arrived at dusk. A gentleman of some 30 years stepped down. His attire, though suited for manual labor, was of excellent quality, though stained with earth, and his gloves were worn through, testament to his dedication. His grey eyes were piercing, holding a shadow of sorrow that Eliza recognized instantly. She regarded him with skepticism. He seemed far too young to possess such profound knowledge. He, in turn, looked upon her, noting her pristine, expensive country clothes, and dismissed her as merely a capricious lady seeking a trivial pastime. Chapter 5. A Symphony of Soil and Sorrow. The first week of labor between Eliza and Éduard was a fierce battle of wills. Éduard, working with silent, intense concentration, issued technical directives, which Eliza followed with her head held high. He viewed her as a bored lady of quality, whilst she saw him as a cold man without a soul. Their conversations were brief, each confined to their own world of grief. Yet the garden cared nothing for titles or secrets. It demanded relentless, hard work. Soon, under the blazing sun, they found themselves working in perfect unison, their hands caked in mud and their knees soiled by the earth. One afternoon, a branch of an ancient rosebush snapped. Eliza instinctively reached out to tend to the damage. "One must know when to let go," Éduard said softly, without looking at her. For the first time, Eliza looked at him with genuine curiosity. His voice was gentle, carrying a deep melancholy. A few days later, a sudden storm broke overhead whilst they were outdoors. Lightning flashed and thunder shook the sky, forcing them to flee into the glasshouse, drenched to the skin as the rain lashed violently against the panes. The silence between them grew heavy. Eliza, watching the droplets course down the glass, felt the crushing weight of her world bear down upon her. "My father was not to blame," she murmured suddenly. Éduard turned to look at her. "I know how it feels," he replied softly. "That terrible sensation that there is absolutely nothing you can do." Unbidden, the words poured from Eliza. She told him everything, the Marquess, his cruel betrayal, and the public humiliation. Éduard froze. "The Marquess of Ashworth," he repeated, his voice dropping. He is the very man who ruined my family. His name is inextricably linked to the scoundrel who betrayed my father." Éduard shared his own history, recounting how a former partner of his father had brought them to absolute ruin, and how that very same man now operated under the employ of the Marquess. In that singular moment, the barriers between them vanished entirely. They ceased to be a lady of quality and a hired botanist. They became two wounded souls betrayed by the exact same adversary. The garden, once a place of solitary toil, transformed into a sanctuary. Mistrust dissolved, and a new connection, a deep, profound empathy, began to take root. Love, much like the roses they so carefully tended, was blossoming in a place that had once seemed utterly devoid of hope. Chapter 6. The Language of the Rose. The garden became their truest refuge. Éduard, for the first time in years, lowered his guard completely. He saw the fierce passion behind Eliza's eyes, the strength that had driven her to clear the choked grounds with her bare hands. Yet beyond her resilience, Éduard discovered her sharp intellect. She did not merely follow his instructions, she refined them. When he tasked her with evaluating the soil, she improvised brilliant solutions with what few resources they had, such as utilizing ash from the hearth to adjust the acidity of the earth. He watched her with a fascination he could no longer conceal. She possessed the mind of a master strategist, and he, a man of science, felt a deep admiration for her sheer practicality. Their affection grew slowly, carefully nurtured. Their conversations began to stretch long into the evenings, until the sunlight turned to molten gold. He spoke to her of the properties of the flora, of how light and shadow formed a perfect symphony, and how every single rose, much like a person, possessed its own unique character. Eliza, for her part, fell deeply in love with his noble heart. She observed him interacting with her sister and her young niece and nephew, always with endless patience and a warm smile. She admired his inherent goodness. One afternoon, the children approached him, asking if plants could feel. Rather than dismissing their childish curiosity, Éduard knelt down to their level, explaining that plants possessed a life of their own, and that if one spoke to them with kindness, they would surely flourish. As the sun dipped below the horizon one evening, Eliza brought out her grandmother's journal. Her fingers trembled slightly as she turned the delicate pages. Éduard took the book with a reverence that took Eliza by surprise. He hung upon every line of the elegant script, entranced by the precise sketches of the roots. "This journal is an absolute treasure," he breathed. "There are insights here that even the finest minds of the Royal Botanical Society have never conceived." He paused, looking at her with absolute sincerity. "I must offer you my apologies, Lady Eliza. When I first arrived, I judged your family harshly. I beg your forgiveness." Eliza smiled with a touch of sadness. "You have no need to apologize, Éduard. After what befell us, my family trusted no one. We had to ensure your intentions were true. Those first tasks, the soil evaluation, the restoration of the grounds, were to see if we could truly rely upon you. My family lost our honor, and what we desire above all else is to reclaim it." Éduard gazed at her with profound understanding. "My family's honor was stolen too," he said softly. "But now, for the very first time, I feel I am not alone in this fight." Love blossomed between them, not with grand, dramatic declarations, but in the quietude of small gestures, stolen glances, and silences that spoke far louder than words. Chapter 7. The Serpent in the Garden. Meanwhile, in the glittering world they had left behind, darkness continued its course. In the grand drawing rooms of Mayfair, the Marquess of Ashworth moved with the sinister grace of a serpent. He was well aware that the Beaumont family had retreated to the countryside, and he had dispatched a trusted spy to watch them. The man returned with word that Lord Beaumont had hired a disgraced botanist. The Marquis did not underestimate the threat. He knew, as did all of London, that the Queen was deeply invested in finding an extraordinary rose. Fear gripped him. If such a flower should ever reach Her Majesty's hands, Eliza would gain a personal audience with the Crown. He knew without a doubt that she would not hesitate to expose his financial deception, bringing his entire plot to ruin the Beaumonts to light. He could not permit it. One afternoon, whilst Éduard was in the local village procuring supplies for the garden, a gentleman approached him. It was Sir Charles Thorn, a botanist of immense renown, though his countenance lacked any of the warmth expected of a man of his high standing. His eyes were cold, sharp, and calculating. Éduard recognized him instantly, a sudden chill coursing down his spine. This was the scoundrel who had ruined his father. Sir Charles extended a hand, his voice smooth and deceptively sweet. "Éduard, I have heard of your employment here. I should like to discuss a matter of business. The Marquess of Ashworth has entrusted me with a vital project, and I thought we might strike a mutually beneficial bargain." Éduard felt a wave of revulsion but remained silent, appalled by the sheer depths of human malice. Sir Charles continued, speaking specifically of the Queen's Rose, pressing for details on their progress. Éduard, remaining cautious, offered only vague replies, but Sir Charles persisted. "The Marquess of Ashworth," Thorn whispered, "is a man of immense honor and vast influence. He could make your life exceedingly comfortable. For instance, he would gladly bestow a fortune upon you, if this rose should happen to fail to bloom." Éduard glared at him, his eyes flashing with fury. Sir Charles saw at once that Éduard's honor was not for sale. With a firmness that surprised even himself, Éduard brought the conversation to an abrupt end, warning Thorn to leave the Beaumonts in peace, as they had caused them, and his own family, quite enough suffering. Days passed without further word from Sir Charles, yet the encounter haunted Éduard, robbing him of sleep. One night, when the moon rode high in the midnight sky, Éduard stepped out onto the terrace for a breath of fresh air. Suddenly, a shadow flickered across the grounds. It was Sir Charles, carrying a small vial in his hand, moving with stealthy, silent steps. Éduard realized instantly that Thorn intended to sabotage the rose that was slowly thriving in the soil. Observing his movements, Éduard discerned that his goal was not outright destruction, but a silent, insidious ruin. The poison would not kill the plant immediately, but cause it to wither slowly, ensuring no suspicion was raised. Sprinting from the terrace, Éduard confronted Thorn, choosing the power of words over violence. "I know exactly who you are, Thorn," he said, his voice deadly calm. "And I know what you are doing." Thorn scoffed, a cruel sneer playing on his lips. "You are a fool, Éduard. A mere botanist with dirt beneath his fingernails. You cannot stand against me." But Éduard stared him down, a fierce, unyielding strength burning in his eyes, a gaze so terrifying that Thorn's arrogance crumbled, leaving him with no choice but to confess his wretched plot. "For your own sake, keep well away from this family," Éduard commanded, looking his enemy dead in the eye. "I will not allow you to cross my path again. My honor cannot be bought with your gold." Thanks to his swift intervention, the nefarious plan was thwarted. Defeated, Thorn retreated into the darkness, muttering dark promises that they would meet again. Chapter 8: Royal Justice and Eternal Blooms. The following dawn broke in shades of pearl grey. Éduard had not slept a wink, his mind fixed upon the treacherous figure of Sir Charles Thorn, his blood boiling with lingering anger. At sunrise, he met Eliza by the rosebush, where she was already making notes. "We have a problem," Éduard said, his voice rough from exhaustion. As he recounted the night's events, Eliza looked at him, her heart shattering as terror filled her eyes. But when Éduard drew her into a fierce, tender embrace, her fears evaporated into the morning air. Suddenly, as if in silent gratitude for their protection, a single rose bud began to unfurl before their very eyes. It was a vision of absolute, breathtaking beauty. Its velvet petals, remarkably dark at the core, opened majestically, glowing with a deep purple hue that seemed to radiate a light of its own. Looking upon its perfection, they knew with absolute certainty that they had triumphed. Days later, the entire family presented themselves at Buckingham House. In the antechamber, the Marquess of Ashworth caught sight of them, his aristocratic features twisting with pure malice. "My lady," he sneered, stepping into Eliza's path, "you should know that you are about to face the utmost displeasure of Her Majesty." Eliza met his gaze with a serene calm that utterly disarmed him. "It is the truth that you should fear, Marquis," she replied, her voice unwavering. Inside the royal court, a profound silence fell over the room as the Queen regarded them. Her piercing, wise gaze was intimidating, but Eliza, her voice ringing clear and true, laid out their offering and their story. "Your Majesty," Eliza said, holding her head high, "my grandmother named this flower the velvet purple rose. It stands as living proof that beauty can flourish even in the darkest corners, and that truth will always triumph over corrupt power. With unyielding courage, she recounted the full history of the Marquess of Ashworth's betrayal. The Queen, who had long suspected the Marquess lacked true nobility of character, nodded slowly, before inquiring after Édouard's family. When the full extent of the machinations perpetrated by the Marquess and Sir Charles Thorn was laid bare, revealing how they had systematically driven the Wilson family to bankruptcy, Her Majesty's indignation was absolute. The Queen stripped the Marquess of Ashworth of his titles on the spot, commanding that full restitution of all property and funds be made immediately to both Lord Beaumont and the Wilson family. "Your name," the Queen declared, her voice echoing through the hall, "is no longer worthy of a peerage." Furthermore, Her Majesty revoked Sir Charles Thorn's license to practice botany, ensuring the man who had enriched himself through unscrupulous deception was utterly ruined. On the journey back to the countryside, the family experienced a sense of profound peace for the first time in months. Their honor, and that of the Wilson family, had been fully restored. The summer manor had transformed from a bleak exile into a true home, forging a fierce inner strength within them all. They had looked adversity in the eye, refusing to be paralyzed by betrayal, and through dedication, hard labor, and resilience, they had won their greatest battle. Clarissa went on to become a celebrated artist of great renown. She painted the interior of the manor using the vibrant hues of the garden, filling the home with warmth and life. Her children were immensely proud of both their mother and their aunt, eagerly recounting the tale of the miraculous rose to any guest who passed through their gates, and Édouard became their truest hero. When spring arrived, it brought with it a most enchanting ceremony. Eliza and Édouard were wed. It was a day of pure joy for both families, between whom a deep, genuine bond of friendship had formed. The newlyweds chose to remain at the country estate, fully restoring it to the distinction and elegance of former times. Within the heart of the garden, they created an intimate, beautiful sanctuary dedicated to Grandmother Anna, whose enduring wisdom had gifted them something so profound. Their shared devotion to the earth continued to bind them together through years of laughter, hard work, and brilliant new ideas. Wrapped in each other's arms, they became renowned throughout the kingdom for cultivating the most extraordinary roses. Yet, above all else, the garden remained an eternal symbol of perseverance, faith, and joy, for it was within those very grounds that they had found their truest love.